Hi guys, Hengist here from House of Hengist Comics, and a very warm and big welcome back to the channel. Today it is Blitzkrieg, it's episode 20, Blazing Saddles. First we'll look at the news, and today we're going to be looking in the Leeuwarden area, just past this OO line at a place called Wons. Now, critical in this map is the blue areas, which are the areas below seawater. So the Dutch had quite an easy way of effectively flooding these areas by controlling the canals and controlling the water. But when there were disasters like in 1954, the whole landscape is effectively under a deluge of water. In Britain, May the 10th, we have the appointment of Winston Churchill as Prime Minister. He was up against Lord Halifax, but was ultimately selected. Obviously not as passive as Macmillan in the past, and he sets out his own agenda and is to make his mark. But a great video on the whole of the Dutch campaign, which can be found in The Fall of France, is this battlefield documentary, so take a look. As we return to the front line, we see that bridges have been destroyed and deliberately blown. The Germans are having to use a lot of engineering equipment and ingenuity to keep the pace of their advance going. And ultimately they are getting support from some Dutch who basically are pro-German in their support. Others basically are very against their occupation. The civilians are affected and being displaced. Rotterdam is quite quiet at this stage, but there is a run on food and people are panicking. The post is also falling behind, and so messages to and from other nations are affected. And we're going to be looking at the German cavalry today once more and examine what they basically were doing up in this northern area and how effective the cavalry arm is. Because basically what you have is a mechanized force which is more reliant on, I suppose, fodder than fuel. And this requires a lot of training. The horses have to be kept in good condition, and they basically have to have all their equipment, like their shoes and their general well-being tended for. The Women's German Auxiliary was also supporting in this as well, which I wasn't aware of, which was quite interesting. So there's a lot to the cavalry, from the leather to the uniforms to everything that goes into supporting them, but it's a hell of a lot easier to keep these moving than it is a fully mechanized force in itself. So if we return to the map, we've seen the start of some of these parachute operations. So today we're going to be looking at the Dutch forces, which are basically defending this Wons area, and this area is heavily waterlogged and underwater. Now the Dutch have a pretty good command and control system, contrary to much opinion. Their infantry, although they don't have sufficient numbers, they are still recruiting. They do have their motorbikes, and they've got a lot of varied forces. Heavy machine guns again, which have been so effective. And also this Lewis gun, which obviously as a general purpose machine gun is good. They're going to have artillery today. They will be green once again. And we can only hope that once more they manage to hold off the German advance. Now the German forces today, again, it's a very similar force to the last operation that we saw them in. These are confident, trained German infantry. I thought this helmet was quite interesting with the camouflage that I've dug out. But as you can see, they're mounted with a sort of grey blanket underneath the saddle. They move obviously in support with artillery and other equipment in wagons. And we're going to see possibly either an energetic officer leading them, we might see the cook once more, or possibly a malingerer. These are special characters found in the headquarters element of the company. So let's now look at the research and the set for this. As I said, this is an area called Wons, which is below here on the right hand side of the map, and you can see the extent of the flooded area. And we're going to be looking at this cavalry penetration into this sector. Again, Sam's provided me with some Google Street View maps, which help build up a picture of what's going on this battlefield. Once more we see the irrigation ditches, and once again we see how flat and open it is. And this is his map, the culmination of his research. Campaign Sam's very thorough in what he does. Okay, let's look at the mission and the objectives now. As we've said, the area is heavily flooded. This has masses of problems for both the infantry and for any vehicles or horses. Ultimately, there'll be no doubling, no digging in these conditions. Some areas like this will be impassable. Vehicles will have to re-roll successful bogging checks whenever they move. And the terrain itself limits basically the German avenue of attack. Now all they have to do is get 2 platoons off the table basically, and they have met their objectives. However, the Dutch also will have moles. This is some areas they've built above ground as a defensive position. These are the only dug in areas per se. Well, this week I was set a real challenge. How do you deploy flooded areas? I decided on cling film basically, so I wrapped the whole set in this. I'm not sure whether it works, but each week we have these tests, and it really does help me try and basically push myself to come up with ideas. As you can see, the cling film's underneath there. I'm going to flatten it out a little bit and try and make it look a rippled effect. There's the blue bridge. That'll be the first entrance point for the Germans, and then the footbridge here, which is the second entrance point. Ultimately, we've got 3 farms in the area. This is the one on the left flank. We have the mole here, which is bulletproof cover and the only dug in real area. We've also got von Klarbergen's farm and also Edzard van Zanten's farm. They fought at Maastricht, great episode, suggest you look at that. We can see the irrigation ditches here, and the whole area is just underwater, about 1 foot to 2 feet. So let's get into the action. Well, it's early morning, it's quite fair weather, but the ground is inundated. The Dutch basically win the toss. They've got half on and half in reserve. They've got 2 platoons supporting the mole on either flank. That's at Van Dijk's farm on the far right, and on the left we've got basically at Van Klarbergen's house. We've also got the HQ company as seen here. What we can now see is the Germans, they decide to move up, and they're going to go for the Dutch right. They're going to concentrate their forces, move up with an energetic officer. They've also taken a vet, and here we see the SDK-13s crossing the bridge with the mortars in the lorries. These guys are going to move up and support that cavalry attack, staying on the roads because of the bogging checks and re-rolls on the floodplain. What we now see is basically the Dutch basically moving forward as best they can with their anti-tank guns, re-rolling for wheeling it through that. When the mortars open up, hit some cavalry, and some horsemen are basically thrown off it. The energetic officer leads. They've got a banner, so they need 7 hits to pin. The SDKs basically cover effectively the mortar vehicles, but as you can see from this position here, the heavy machine guns, they're well out of range basically across this floodwater. But the SDKs are going to stay on safe ground, so to speak, not risk the bogging checks, as we've said. At Van Dijk farm, they can only just watch in horror as the cavalry pound down towards them. Uncommon Valour has been played basically to get that platoon moving, and the first cavalry platoon launches an assault towards basically the Dutch position. The SDKs are giving covering fire into Van Dijk. Smoke has been used to cover the heavy machine guns so they can't really fire. And all the Dutch can do is try and get defensive fire. They need 7 hits but fail. The Germans knock off a couple of teams through shooting as they come charging in. And although the Dutch have got a reserve platoon which has arrived in the centre, it's down to these little mortars which prove really effective. And just as the Germans are about to break through, those mortars hit and pin them again. And the one I see here has a very difficult decision. He splits off half his force, moves it across towards the threatened right flank. He's hit by mortars as their vet come medic basically reanimates one of the teams from first platoon, which is still active, so he can do that. But another melee ensues, and effectively the Dutch are broken as we see German bicycle infantry and heavy machine guns move in the centre. The horse artillery come over the footbridge, and the cavalry scouts and second platoon are moving up. The Dutch again counter-attack, having rallied incredibly, but are effectively shot to pieces and cut down and driven off and eventually break as the vet races in to try and reanimate some lost teams. We also get the arrival now of Dutch artillery and the Dutch bicycle troops. The mortars are still firing and pinning, and they're pinning the veteran scouts, but the SDK-13s are proved to be a big problem. So the one I see has got across into the building. He's taken 2 heavy machine guns, and the Germans are pinned. A joker is played, followed by a counter joker, which is possible, and they remain pinned, fortunately. But over on the left flank, what we've got problems. The Germans, however, continue to move forwards. The heavy machine guns come under mortar fire, so they've got problems, and there's a hell of a lot of machine gun fire from these three little SDK-13s, which effectively eventually destroy ultimately the company mortars, or take one of them out. The cavalry presses on now, and 1st platoon leave the table. The 2nd platoon and scouts, however, get pinned by the artillery. When we see the arrival of a lone ME1 turn, it rolls a D6 and gets 4 turns of air attack, as more smoke is now laid where the heavy machine guns have gone into the farm building. An attempt is made to stop one of the German heavy machine guns. That fails from jamming. We've now got the anti-tank guns move up onto the mole as the bicycle troops that were in front of the artillery move into the dike, and the artillery is switched onto the German bicycle troops as they come in. Unfortunately, the Dutch spotter turns up, and of course the ME110 is on the table, and it basically shoots it down with ease. We've also got problems now with the Dutch who are compelled to counterattack. They've got to try, and they go in against the SDK-13s, who concentrate all their fire on the one IC and wipe him out, and that small detachment. However, that platoon that was not hit fails tank terror and pulls back as the cavalry now swing round the flank. And the ME110 concentrates on the artillery. It's dropping bombs and pinning it. And the horse artillery unlimber and fire with full effect, blowing 2 heavy machine guns to pieces in Van Dyke Farm. We've also got problems down on that irrigation ditch as the bicycle troops are destroyed. A blown card is played on that cavalry before it's launching a massive assault round the flank. They haven't sent the 2nd platoon off the table yet. They've decided to break this company and destroy it, taking an opportunity. And with the firepower they've got, and the mortars, and the cavalry now who are unsheathing from their scabbards their bayonets and using them as sabres, they charge into this position and effectively overrun both the heavy machine gun that was left, destroying that, and basically the sole company mortar. Out come the HQ platoon, because they've still got their leader with them. They try and stop the flood of cavalry as it pounds forwards. However, they are very unfortunate and effectively cut to pieces and shot down, and they break. And with that break, effectively the whole company is destroyed and broken. The artillery, which was pinned down, can't get off the table and will be caught in that flood water. The armoured cars are all good, the horse artillery is all good, and it's basically been a very successful and decisive attack. Only the bicycle troops could have effectively got off. And this map really shows the way that this battle was fought. It was a hammer and anvil, classic hammer and anvil, and a brilliant attack by the cavalry. The mortars were very effective. The German mortars tend to be very effective. And the German cavalry sort of made up for the last battle and showed what they could do. But once again, it's the small armoured cars that are causing so many problems. And the German cavalry can be really proud of themselves in this assault. Well, the ground conditions were a massive factor in this postscript. The Dutch just couldn't get anywhere to basically prevent the cavalry basically exploiting their mobility, speed, and effectively aggressive manoeuvrability. It was a great game with a lot going on, and unfortunately we didn't have a lot of time to narrate that. But you can get these cavalry in 15mm from Peter Pig. Klaus Richter's works on weapons and equipment is worth viewing, and we've got Paul Deming also going to help us from Wild Building, so check him out. I'd also like to quickly thank Richard Costa Phillips, basically, because his work continues on Operation Amsterdam and it's looking absolutely fantastic, as you can see here. Can't wait for this. Also a shout out to Joko Gislason, who is a fantastically well-known wargamer and now a biographer. Here's his book on Mariana Mitrofanova. Have a check that out. We've got actions now continuing on the KW line. We're going to have more parachute operations, and of course the Battle of Hanu, that will be coming up. So always take time to remember the fallen, guys, and in the meantime, it's best wishes from me, and over and out. Bye for now.